There is a particular kind of quiet that belongs to words which have been spoken so many times by so many people across so many centuries that they no longer feel like words written by one person at all. They feel like something closer to the air itself, present, available, carried gently from one generation to the next without ever wearing thin. This is a peaceful story from the ancient scriptures, set aside for the quiet hours of night. Let it carry you gently toward rest. Tonight we are not following a single narrative from beginning to end, the way we might follow the story of a crossing or a battle or a calling. Tonight we are resting in poetry, in 4 songs attributed to David, the shepherd who became king, written across the long and varied unfolding of his life. Some were written, the tradition tells us, in seasons of danger, some in seasons of longing, some in the quiet aftermath of having been brought through something difficult. They do not all come from the same moment, and we will not press too hard on exactly when each one was composed. What matters tonight is simply that they exist, that they have been treasured for 3,000 years, and that they were written by someone who knew from the inside both fear and trust, both hunger and rest. We have spoken before of David's years as a shepherd in the hills around Bethlehem. The long days with the flock, the watching, the music that grew out of solitude. These songs are some of the fruit of those years and of everything that came after them. We will move through 4 of them slowly tonight, the way one might walk slowly through a quiet garden in the evening, pausing wherever there is something worth pausing for. The poems of the ancient Hebrew scriptures were not written the way much of our modern poetry is written, for the eye, to be read silently on a page. They were composed for the ear, for the voice, often for the accompaniment of instruments. The lyre that David played in his youth, the harp mentioned in various places in the ancient texts, the stringed instruments that accompanied temple worship in later centuries. These songs lived first as sound, as something sung or chanted, often in community, often as part of the larger fabric of worship in ancient Israel. The collection that contains these songs, the book that later tradition calls the Psalms, gathered together poetry from many hands across many centuries. Not only David's, though a great many bear his name in their ancient headings. They were arranged eventually into a kind of songbook for the whole community, words to be used in worship, in lament, in celebration, in the ordinary unfolding of a life of faith. Tonight we will rest in 4 of them, not racing through their content, not treating them as text to be analyzed, but simply letting their images and their cadences settle into the quiet of this hour, the way water settles into the lowest part of a basin, finding its own level, undisturbed. Let us begin where David himself began, with the image of a shepherd, because it is the image he returns to first when he wants to describe his own relationship to the one he trusted. "The Lord is my shepherd," the song begins, "I shall not want." These 5 words, in their ancient Hebrew form fewer still, have been carried into more households, more hospital rooms, more quiet evenings of human need than perhaps any other single line in the whole of the ancient scriptures. They are simple, a child can hold them, and they are bottomless. People return to them across an entire lifetime and continue finding new depths within their simplicity. David, who had spent his early years watching over his father's sheep in the hills around Bethlehem, understood from direct experience what it meant to be a shepherd. He knew the work itself, the early rising, The long days of walking the flock from one pasture to another, the constant low-level vigilance for danger, the particular tenderness required for the weakest or youngest animals in the flock. He knew what good shepherding looked like because he had practiced it himself, season after season, before anyone beyond his own household knew his name. And so when he wrote this song, he was not describing an abstraction. He was reaching for the most concrete and personally understood image available to him, and turning it around, describing what it felt like to be cared for in the same way he had once cared for others. He makes me lie down in green pastures, the song continues. He leads me beside quiet waters. There is something worth noticing in the structure of these images. The shepherd does not simply permit the sheep to find rest on their own. He makes them lie down, an active verb, suggesting a deliberate guiding toward rest rather than a passive permission for it. Sheep, left entirely to their own instincts, do not always know when to stop grazing, when to settle, when the body has had enough activity and needs instead to be still. A good shepherd recognizes this need before the sheep themselves recognize it, and gently moves the flock toward the rest they require. Green pastures in the dry hill country of Judah were not always easy to find. Much of the year, the hillsides around Bethlehem would have been brown and sparse, the grass having dried under the relentless Mediterranean sun. A shepherd who knew his territory well would know where the hidden green places were. The shaded valleys, the spots near a spring or a seep where moisture lingered longer than elsewhere, the places where grass continued to grow even when the wider landscape had gone dry. To be led to green pastures was to be led by someone who knew the terrain intimately toward a provision that was not obvious or automatic. It required the shepherd's knowledge. It required trust on the part of the flock, who could not have found these particular places on their own. Quiet waters, or still waters, in some of the older translations. This image, too, carries a practical wisdom beneath its peacefulness. Sheep, it turns out, are hesitant to drink from rushing or turbulent water. The sound and motion of a fast-moving stream can frighten them, and they may go thirsty rather than risk the unfamiliar turbulence. A shepherd who wanted his flock to drink safely would lead them instead to the places where the water moved gently, a calm pool, a slow bend in a stream, a place where the current had settled into something quiet enough for a nervous animal to approach without fear. This is a small but tender detail to hold in the stillness of this hour. The shepherd does not simply provide water. He provides water in the form the flock can actually receive. Calm enough, quiet enough, gentle enough, that fear does not prevent the receiving of what is needed. He restores my soul, the song says next. Some translations render this "he refreshes my soul," or "he renews my life." The Hebrew word for soul here, nephesh, carries a broader meaning than the English word sometimes suggests. It can mean the whole living self, the breath and vitality of a person, not only some detachable spiritual component. To have one's nephesh restored is to have one's whole life renewed, body, breath, and spirit together, brought back to a fuller version of itself after having been depleted by the ordinary wearing down of difficult days. The song continues, and its movement is worth following slowly. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. The image shifts here from rest to movement, from the still waters and green pastures to the paths that must be walked. A shepherd does not keep the flock in one place forever. There is movement required, from pasture to pasture, season to season, and the paths chosen matter. A path of righteousness, in this image, suggests not primarily a moral instruction, but a practical one. The right path, the correct route, the way that actually leads where the flock needs to go, rather than into danger or exhaustion or loss. For his name's sake, the shepherd's own reputation, his own character, is invested in choosing the right path. A shepherd who led his flock carelessly, who chose paths that endangered or exhausted the animals in his care, would be known as a poor shepherd. The careful choosing of the path was, in this sense, an expression of the shepherd's own integrity as much as a provision for the flock's welfare. And then the song turns towards something more difficult. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. The valley of deep shadow. This phrase, so often rendered in English as the valley of the shadow of death, describes a particular kind of terrain that any shepherd in the hill country of ancient Judah would have recognized. The landscape there is full of narrow ravines and steep-sided valleys, places where the sun's light is blocked for much of the day by the high walls on either side, where shadow gathers and lingers, even when the surrounding hilltops are bright with daylight. These valleys could be genuinely dangerous places for a flock to pass through. Narrow passages where predators could wait unseen, where the footing might be uncertain, where the natural feeling of enclosure could provoke fear even without an actual threat present. A shepherd leading sheep through such a valley did not pretend the danger was not real. He simply walked through it with them, present at every step, his rod ready to drive off any threat, and his staff ready to guide or rescue any sheep that stumbled or strayed. The rod and the staff were not merely symbolic. They were practical tools. The rod a means of defense, sturdy enough to strike at a predator, and the staff a longer implement with a crook at its end, useful for guiding the flock or for hooking and drawing back a sheep that had wandered too near a cliff edge or fallen into a crevice. The comfort in this image is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of the shepherd within the danger, walking the same valley, carrying the same tools, available at the same moments of need. The song shifts again, and the imagery changes from pastoral to something more like hospitality. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. This is a striking turn. The shepherd of the earlier verses becomes, in this image, something more like a host, someone preparing a feast, extending the courtesies of welcome and abundance to a guest. And the setting for this feast is not peaceful isolation, but the presence of enemies. The same kind of language that appears throughout David's life. A man who spent years being pursued, who knew what it was to have genuine adversaries seeking his harm. The image suggests something remarkable, that the provision and welcome described here are not contingent on the absence of danger. The table is prepared even while the enemies are present, even while the threat has not been fully resolved. There is a kind of settledness in this image that does not wait for circumstances to become safe before allowing for rest and provision and welcome. To anoint the head with oil was, in the ancient Near Eastern world, both a practical and a symbolic gesture of hospitality. Olive oil, perfumed sometimes with spices, was used to refresh and soften the skin after the dust and heat of travel. A guest arriving at a household would often be offered water to wash the feet and oil to anoint the head. gestures of welcome and refreshment after a difficult journey. To have one's head anointed was to be received, honored, cared for as a valued guest, rather than merely tolerated as a stranger. My cup overflows, not simply filled, but overflowing, more than sufficient, abundance beyond the measure of what was strictly needed. And the song concludes with words that have, perhaps even more than any other line in this poem, been carried into the deepest needs of human hearts across the centuries. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Goodness and mercy following, not goodness and mercy waiting somewhere ahead to be earned or achieved, but following the way a faithful companion follows, present in the past as well as oriented toward the future, accompanying the whole of a life rather than appearing only at its conclusion. And the dwelling, the house of the Lord, forever. For a shepherd whose life had been spent largely outdoors, in tents and temporary shelters, moving from pasture to pasture without a permanent home of his own, this image of a lasting house, a place of permanent dwelling, carries a particular poignancy. The temporary nature of the shepherd's outdoor life finds its resolution in the promise of something that does not need to be packed up and moved again. A house, a dwelling, forever. This is where the 23rd Psalm comes to rest, and it is a good place for our own thoughts to rest as well, for a few moments, before we move to the next song. Let us turn now to another psalm, the 27th, which begins not with the gentle image of a shepherd, but with a more direct address to fear itself. The Lord is my light and my salvation, the song begins. Whom shall I fear? This psalm, in its traditional association with David, is often understood to come from a season of genuine danger, perhaps from the years of fleeing from Saul, or from some other period in his long and eventful life when the threat of harm was not abstract, but immediate and pressing. The opening question carries the rhetorical weight of someone who has examined his situation honestly and arrived, through that honest examination, at a settled answer. Whom shall I fear? This is not a denial that frightening things exist. The psalm goes on in its following verses to name real adversaries, evildoers, an army encamped against him, war rising up. The fear being addressed is not imaginary fear, fear of nothing. It is fear of something genuinely dangerous, examined honestly, and then answered with a counter question that reframes the entire situation. Given who is described as my light and my salvation, what is left that could finally overwhelm me? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, the psalm continues. Of whom shall I be afraid? A stronghold in the ancient world was a fortified place, a structure built into difficult terrain, often into the rock itself, designed to withstand siege and assault. The hill country of Judah, where David spent much of his life, was full of such places, caves and rocky outcroppings that had been used for centuries as places of refuge during times of danger. David himself, during his years of fleeing from Saul, had taken shelter in such strongholds, hiding in caves and rocky fastnesses in the wilderness of Judah, while his pursuers searched for him. The image of God as a stronghold draws directly on this lived experience. Just as a physical stronghold offered genuine practical protection, walls thick enough to resist attack, positions high enough to make approach difficult, defenses that had been tested and proven across generations of use. So too, the psalm suggests, the protection being described here is not merely emotional or abstract, but something with the same quality of genuine, reliable security. when evildoers assail me to eat up my flesh. The psalm continues, using language of vivid and visceral threat. My adversaries and foes, it is they who stumble and fall. There is a confidence here that does not depend on the absence of attack, but on the outcome of it. The adversaries come, the threat is real, and yet they are the ones who stumble. The psalm is not promising that the writer will never be approached by danger. It is expressing a settled trust about how such confrontations, when they do come, will ultimately resolve. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war arise against me, in this I will be confident. An army encamped, the language of genuine military siege, the kind of overwhelming force that would reasonably terrify anyone facing it without such confidence. And yet, the psalm says, my heart shall not fear. Not because the army is imaginary or the danger overstated, but because the confidence being described rests on something other than the relative size of the opposing forces. The psalm then turns towards something the writer says he desires above all else. One thing I have asked of the Lord, that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold his beauty and to inquire in his temple. This single desire, named so simply, is worth resting on for a moment. Not a request for the removal of the army, not a request for the defeat of every adversary, not even, primarily, a request for safety in the most immediate sense. The one thing desired is presence, to dwell, to remain, to be in the place where the beauty of the one being addressed can be beheld, and where questions can be brought and considered. The temple referenced here is, in the historical unfolding of Israel's worship, somewhat complicated. David himself did not live to see the great temple that his son Solomon would build in Jerusalem. In David's own lifetime, the tabernacle, the portable tent shrine from the wilderness years, was still the central place of worship. But the longing expressed in the psalm transcends the specific architecture being referenced. It is a longing for proximity, for nearness, for the kind of access that allows ongoing relationship rather than occasional distant encounter. For he will hide me in the shelter of his tabernacle, the psalm continues. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will set me high upon a rock. The shelter, the tent's cover, the high rock, three different images for the same underlying reality, each one drawing on a different aspect of the physical landscape and physical structures that David would have known intimately from his years in the wilderness and his years of military campaign. Shelter from weather and danger, concealment from pursuit, elevation above the reach of those who would do harm. And then the heart of the song begins to be heard in its own words. Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud. Be gracious to me and answer me. There is something tender in this shift from confident declaration to direct petition. The psalm has spent its opening verses declaring trust and confidence, and now it turns to actually asking, to crying aloud, to seeking grace, to requesting an answer. The confidence does not make the asking unnecessary. Trust and petition exist together without contradiction in the same prayer. When you said, "Seek my face," my heart said to you, "Your face, Lord, do I seek. Do not hide your face from me." This exchange, an invitation given and a response offered, carries the quality of intimate dialogue, the kind of exchange that happens between people who know each other well enough to speak directly and without elaborate formality. Seek my face. Your face I do seek. The simplicity of the exchange does not diminish its depth. If anything, the directness deepens the sense of genuine relationship being described. The psalm includes a line that carries, even in its brevity, an enormous weight of tenderness. For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me in. We do not know, from the historical record, the precise circumstances behind this line, whether it reflects an actual estrangement from David's parents at some point in his life, or whether it functions more as a general statement about the possibility of even the most fundamental human relationships failing, set against the promise of a more reliable welcome. The ancient world, like every world, knew the reality of family rupture. Parents who failed their children, children who were abandoned or rejected, the particular grief of finding that even the most basic sources of human security could not always be relied upon. Against this possibility, the psalm offers a counter-promise. The Lord will take me in. The image is of adoption, of gathering in, of a welcome extended specifically into the space left by a more fundamental human failure. Whatever the specific occasion for this line in David's own life, it has been received across the centuries since as a word of comfort for anyone who has known the particular grief of feeling abandoned by those who should have been most reliable. A word that does not minimize the grief, but offers, alongside it, a different and more durable welcome. Teach me your way, Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my enemies. Do not give me up to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and they breathe out violence. The honesty of this psalm continues even in its closing movements. The adversaries have not disappeared. The false testimony continues. The violence is still being breathed out somewhere nearby. The psalm does not resolve its tension by pretending the danger has passed. It resolves it, instead, by continuing to bring the danger honestly before the one being addressed, trusting that this honest bringing is itself part of what faithful waiting looks like. I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, the psalm says, near its end. In the land of the living, not only in some future or distant realm, but here, now, in the midst of ongoing life, with all its uncertainty and danger still present. The goodness being anticipated is not relegated to an afterlife or a far horizon. It is expected here, in the land where the writer currently lives and currently faces his adversaries. And then the psalm's final words, among the most quietly powerful in the whole collection. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. The repetition, wait for the Lord, appearing both at the beginning and the end of this closing instruction, gives the line a quality of deliberate emphasis, as though the writer wanted to make sure this particular counsel would not be missed or forgotten amid everything else the psalm has said. Waiting here is not passive resignation. It is paired with strength and courage, an active stance of the heart that continues to hold its ground even while the resolution it longs for has not yet arrived. This is where the 27th Psalm rests, and it is worth letting its final instructions settle quietly into the stillness of this hour. Wait, and let the heart be strong in the waiting. Let us turn now to a third psalm, the 63rd, which the ancient heading associates with a particular season in David's life, a time when he was in the wilderness of Judah. This detail matters for understanding the texture of the images that follow. The wilderness of Judah, the region southeast of Bethlehem and Jerusalem stretching down toward the Dead Sea, is one of the most genuinely arid landscapes in the entire region. A place of stark limestone hills, deep ravines and long stretches where water is scarce and the sun's heat is relentless and unmitigated by shade. David had spent time in this wilderness during his years of fleeing from Saul, hiding in its caves and rocky strongholds, and the psalm that bears the marks of this season draws directly on the physical sensations of that particular landscape. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. The thirst described here is not metaphorical in the sense of being disconnected from physical reality. David, in the wilderness of Judah, would have known actual thirst, the parched mouth, the dry skin, the particular exhaustion that comes from moving through a landscape that offers no easy relief from heat and dryness. The psalm takes this entirely physical sensation and uses it as the most honest available language for a deeper longing, a thirst of the soul that mirrors in its intensity the thirst of a body moving through genuinely arid terrain. This is one of the qualities that makes the Psalms, as a whole, so enduringly resonant across so many centuries and cultures. Their willingness to draw the deepest spiritual longings in the vocabulary of the most ordinary physical experience: hunger, thirst, exhaustion, the relief of shade, the comfort of water. These are universal human sensations, available to every reader in every era, regardless of how much or how little they understand about the specific historical and theological context of ancient Israel. My soul thirsts for you, my flesh faints for you, soul and flesh together, the whole person reaching toward the same object of longing, undivided in their need. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, the psalm continues, to see your power and glory. Because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. Better than life. A striking claim, especially from someone who, in the wilderness of Judah, was quite literally fighting to preserve his own life against genuine threats to it. And yet the psalm places the steadfast love being described above even this most basic of goods, the preservation of one's own existence. This is not a dismissal of the value of life. It is an indication of how highly the love being described is valued, that it could be named as exceeding even so fundamental a good. So I will bless you as long as I live, the psalm goes on. I will lift up my hands and call on your name. The lifting of hands was a common posture of prayer in the ancient world. Open palms raised, a gesture of both supplication and praise, the body itself oriented toward what was being sought or honored. This physical posture, described so simply in the psalm, gives us a small window into what prayer actually looked like in the embodied practice of ancient Israel. Not always silent, not always seated, but sometimes standing with hands lifted, the whole body engaged in the act of address. My soul will be satisfied as with the richest of foods, the psalm continues, moving from the earlier image of thirst toward an image of satisfied hunger, abundance answering the earlier scarcity. My mouth will praise you with joyful lips. This movement, from thirst in a dry land to satisfaction with the richest of foods, traces an arc that the whole psalm seems to be making, beginning in genuine deprivation and longing, and arriving, by its conclusion, at a settled sense of abundance and praise. The arc does not deny the reality of the wilderness, the genuine thirst that began the psalm. It simply describes what became possible within that same wilderness, through the ongoing practice of seeking and remembering and praising. There is a verse in this psalm that speaks directly to the particular hours we are inhabiting tonight. When I remember you upon my bed, I meditate on you in the night watches. The night watches, a reference to the ancient system of dividing the night into segments, often 3 watches, for the purposes of those who needed to maintain vigilance through the dark hours. Soldiers on guard duty, shepherds watching their flocks against nocturnal predators, anyone whose responsibilities required wakefulness when most of the world slept. David, who had spent so many nights of his life as a shepherd watching over sheep, and so many other nights as a fugitive watching for pursuers, and so many nights later as a king with the weight of a nation's well-being pressing on his thoughts. David knew the night watches intimately, knew what it was to lie awake while the world around him slept, knew the particular quality of thought and feeling that arises in those quiet, wakeful hours. And in this psalm, he describes turning those wakeful hours toward remembrance, not toward anxious rehearsal of the day's dangers, not toward fearful anticipation of what the morning might bring, but toward a deliberate, peaceful meditation on the one his soul had been thirsting for throughout the earlier verses of the psalm. This is worth holding gently in the stillness of our own night to night. The night watches do not have to be filled only with worry. They can become, as this ancient psalm suggests, a time for quiet remembrance, turning the mind toward what is good and trustworthy and present, even in the hours when sleep does not come easily, or when wakefulness has, for whatever reason, found us. For you have been my help, the psalm continues, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. The image of wings appears here, as it has appeared in other ancient songs and stories we have considered. The image of a great bird, sheltering what is vulnerable beneath the spread of its feathers. This image, gentle and protective, appears repeatedly across the Psalms and across other books of the ancient scriptures as a way of describing a particular quality of care, not the care of distant oversight, but the care of immediate, intimate shelter, close enough that the one being protected rests in actual shadow, actual covering, actual nearness. My soul clings to you, the psalm says near its end. Your right hand upholds me, clinging and being upheld. 2 complementary images of dependence, the soul reaching to hold on, and the supporting hand ensuring that the holding does not result in falling. This is where the 63rd Psalm comes to its resolution. Not in the removal of the wilderness, not in the dissolution of every danger that had prompted its opening cry of thirst, but in a settled posture of clinging and being upheld, remembering in the night, singing for joy in the shadow of sheltering wings. Let us turn finally to the 91st Psalm, a song that has been carried, perhaps more than any other in the Psalter, into moments of genuine fear and genuine need across the long history of its use. This psalm does not carry, in its ancient heading, the same explicit attribution to David that the previous 3 carry, and its authorship is held more loosely in the tradition. But it belongs naturally alongside the songs we have already considered tonight, sharing their imagery and their concerns, and it has long been treasured alongside David's psalms as part of the same tradition of trust expressed through poetry. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty, the psalm begins. The secret place, in some of the older translations, the shelter, the hidden place, the covering that is not visible from outside, but that provides genuine protection to whoever has taken refuge within it. This opening image sets the tone for everything that follows. a description not of safety from a distance, but of safety found through actual dwelling, actual abiding, a relationship of ongoing nearness rather than occasional visitation. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Refuge and fortress. Two more images of protective structure, echoing the stronghold language we considered earlier in the 27th Psalm. The hill country of Judah, with its caves and rocky strongholds, continues to supply the vocabulary for these ancient songs of trust, the physical landscape lending its features to describe a spiritual reality that the landscape itself could only partially capture. For he will deliver you from the snare of the fowler, the psalm continues, and from the deadly pestilence. The fowler's snare was a real and practical danger in the ancient world. The traps and nets used to catch birds, set carefully and often invisibly, ready to spring closed on whatever creature triggered them. To be caught in such a snare was to be suddenly and unexpectedly trapped, with little warning and little opportunity to escape once caught. The image suggests danger that comes without obvious warning, the kind of threat that cannot always be anticipated through ordinary vigilance alone. He will cover you with his pinions, the psalm says, and under his wings you will find refuge. The wing imagery returns again here, as it has in the other psalms we have considered tonight. The same protective, sheltering image, the same suggestion of nearness and covering that goes beyond mere oversight into something closer to embrace. His faithfulness is a shield and buckler. You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in darkness, nor the destruction that wastes at noonday. This sequence of dangers, night terror, daytime arrow, darkness stalking pestilence, noonday destruction, together cover the entire arc of a day and night, every hour, every kind of threat that might arise at any time. The psalm is not selective in its scope. It addresses the full range of human vulnerability across the full cycle of time, suggesting that the protection being described is similarly comprehensive, not limited to particular hours or particular categories of danger. The psalm continues with an image that is sobering in its honesty, even while it offers comfort. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. This verse does not promise the absence of suffering and loss from the world more broadly. It acknowledges, with stark honesty, that great numbers may fall, that catastrophe and loss are real possibilities in the world. This psalm describes that the writer is not naive about the genuine presence of danger and tragedy in human experience. What the psalm offers within this honest acknowledgement is a particular kind of confidence about the one who dwells in the secret place of the Most High. Not immunity purchased through some special status, but a settled trust that whatever the wider world experiences of catastrophe, the one abiding in this particular shelter rests secure within it. You will only look with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. Because you have made the Lord your dwelling place, the Most High your habitation, no evil shall be allowed to befall you, no plague come near your tent. The dwelling place language returns here, echoing the shelter and abiding of the psalm's opening verses. The protection described is not a one-time intervention, but an ongoing condition arising from where and with whom one has made one's home. The tent, mentioned in this verse, recalls again the pastoral and nomadic life that lies behind so much of this poetry. The actual physical tents in which shepherds and travelers and fugitives in the wilderness made their temporary homes, For he will command his angels concerning you, to guard you in all your ways. This verse has been carried across the centuries into countless moments of parting and departure, of journeys undertaken and dangers faced. A word of blessing spoken over those setting out into uncertain circumstances. An assurance that the watching and guarding described throughout this psalm extends specifically to ways, to journeys, to the movement of a life from one place to another. They will bear you up in their hands, the psalm continues, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. The image is tender in its specificity, not protection from grand catastrophe alone, but attentiveness even to the small stumbling points of an ordinary path, the loose stone that might turn an ankle, the small hazard that could, in accumulating with others, become a genuine harm. The care described in this psalm extends to the smallest details of a journey, not only its largest dangers. You will tread on the lion and the adder, the psalm says, drawing on the same kind of imagery that appeared in David's account of his shepherding years. The predators that threatened a flock now appearing as threats that the one dwelling in the secret place will tread upon rather than be threatened by. The young lion and the serpent you will trample underfoot. This is vivid and even startling language for a quiet bedtime hour, and we will let it rest gently rather than dwelling on its more vivid edges. What matters in the stillness of this night is the underlying confidence the image expresses, that the dangers which once threatened, the lion, the serpent, the predators of field and wilderness, need not finally have the last word over the one who has made the Most High their dwelling place. The psalm shifts in its final movement into the voice of God responding directly to the one who has expressed this trust. Because he holds fast to me in love, I will deliver him, the voice says. I will protect him because he knows my name. To know the name, in the ancient understanding we have touched on before in other stories, was to have genuine relationship, genuine acquaintance, not merely second-hand information. The knowing described here is the knowing of intimacy rather than the knowing of distant report. When he calls to me, I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will rescue him and honor him. I will be with him in trouble, not I will prevent all trouble from ever touching him, but I will be present within whatever trouble does arrive. This is consistent with the honesty we noted earlier in this same psalm. The 1,000 who fall, the catastrophes that are genuinely possible in the world this poetry describes. The promise is not the absence of trouble, but the presence of companionship within it. With long life I will satisfy him, the voice concludes, and show him my salvation. This is where the 91st Psalm comes to rest, not with a denial of danger, but with a sustained and many-layered description of presence, protection, and companionship that runs through every kind of difficulty the ancient imagination could name, concluding in the assurance of a voice that answers when called upon. Let us pause now in the quiet of this hour and notice what runs through all 4 of these ancient songs. The Shepherd's Psalm, the song of confident waiting, the Wilderness Psalm of thirst and remembrance, and the Psalm of shelter and refuge. Each of them begins in its own way, with an honest acknowledgement of difficulty. The Shepherd's Psalm speaks of the valley of deep shadow and the presence of enemies. The 27th Psalm speaks of evildoers and an encamped army and false witnesses. The 63rd Psalm speaks of a dry and weary land where there is no water. The 91st Psalm speaks of snares and pestilence and the 1,000 who fall. None of these songs pretends that the world is free of danger, or that the writer's circumstances were comfortable, or that trust was easy because the threats were imaginary. They are remarkably honest, all four of them, about the genuine presence of difficulty in the world they describe, and yet each of them moves, by its conclusion, toward a settled confidence that does not depend on the difficulty having been resolved. The shepherd's psalm ends in the house of the Lord forever, even while the valley of shadow and the presence of enemies remain part of the journey that led there. The 27th psalm ends in an instruction to wait, to be strong, to let the heart take courage, not in a declaration that the waiting is over. The 63rd psalm ends in praise, sung from within the very wilderness that prompted its opening cry of thirst. The 91st psalm ends in the voice of God, promising presence within trouble, not the prevention of every trouble. This pattern, honest acknowledgement of difficulty, followed by settled trust that does not require the difficulty to be resolved first, is one of the most enduringly valuable qualities of these ancient songs, and part of why they have continued to be treasured by people in every kind of circumstance across 3,000 years of use. They do not ask the listener to pretend that things are easier than they are. They do not offer comfort built on denial. They offer, instead, something more durable. The testimony of someone who walked through real valleys, faced real adversaries, experienced real thirst, and found, within and not after those experiences, a presence that could be trusted. This is part of what makes them suitable for the particular hour we are in together tonight. Sleep does not require the resolution of every difficulty in one's life. It does not wait for every valley to be crossed or every thirst to be fully quenched. These ancient songs, written by someone who knew genuine difficulty intimately, offer a model for resting honestly, without denial, but also without the difficulty having the final word over the possibility of peace. Let us rest for a few moments more in the physical landscape that produced these songs, because the landscape itself carries a quality of peace worth holding in the imagination as we move toward the close of this story. The hill country of Judah, where David spent his early years, and to which he returned during his years of fleeing from Saul, is a landscape of limestone ridges and terraced valleys, of scattered olive trees and the low scrub vegetation that survives on minimal rainfall, of long views across folded hills toward the more distant horizon, where, on a clear day, the sea is sometimes visible to the west and the deep rift of the Jordan Valley lies to the east. This landscape shaped the images these songs return to again and again. The green pastures, rare and treasured against the more common brown and June colors of the dry season. The quiet waters, sought out deliberately because the flock could not safely drink from anything more turbulent. The valley of deep shadow, an actual feature of the terrain, where narrow ravines block the sun for much of the day. The stronghold and the rock, drawn from the actual caves and rocky fastnesses where fugitives in this terrain had long sought shelter. The dry and weary land, an accurate description of the wilderness of Judah in its more arid stretches. The snare of the fowler, drawn from the actual practice of trapping birds that was part of the ordinary economy of this landscape. These songs did not emerge from abstraction. They emerged from a particular person's intimate, embodied knowledge of a particular stretch of land, its dangers and its hidden mercies, its dry seasons and its occasional green refuges, its narrow shadowed valleys and its high defensible rocks. And perhaps this is part of why these songs have traveled so well. into so many different landscapes and circumstances far removed from the hill country of ancient Judah. Because they were rooted so specifically in one person's real experience of one particular landscape, they carry a quality of authenticity that abstraction could never achieve. The reader or listener, even if they have never seen the hills around Bethlehem, even if they live in a landscape of snow or city streets or flat farmland utterly unlike the limestone ridges of Judah, can recognize in these images something true about their own experience of difficulty in shelter, thirst and provision, danger and rest. The specific becomes universal, not by abandoning its specificity, but by being rendered so honestly and so carefully that anyone, anywhere, can find their own valley and their own green pasture reflected within it. There is something worth noticing about the fact that these particular songs, written, the tradition tells us, in seasons of genuine difficulty, became songs at all, rather than remaining simply as private journal entries of fear or longing. To turn an experience of thirst or danger or threatened abandonment into a song is to do something more than merely record the experience. It is to shape it, to give it form, to find within even the most difficult circumstance a structure capable of being sung. This does not minimize the difficulty. If anything, it suggests a kind of attention and care toward the difficulty that mere venting or complaint does not require. The patient work of finding words that fit, images that capture something true, a structure that can hold both honest lament and genuine hope without collapsing into either despair or false cheerfulness. David, across the long unfolding of his life, shepherd, fugitive, warrior, king, appears to have returned to this practice again and again, turning difficulty into song, turning fear into poetry that could be sung aloud, in community, accompanied by instruments, carried forward into the ongoing worship and memory of his people. We do not know exactly how many of the psalms that bear his name were actually written by him, in the strict historical sense that modern scholarship might require. But the tradition's persistent attribution of so much of this poetry to David reflects something true about the character the ancient accounts give him. A man who, even in his most difficult seasons, turned toward expression rather than silence, toward song rather than mere suffering, toward the patient work of finding words that could hold both the honesty of fear and the settled ground of trust. This practice, singing in the dark, finding words for difficulty rather than only enduring it wordlessly, is part of what these psalms offer to anyone who receives them in their own seasons of difficulty. Not a technique to be applied, not a formula guaranteed to produce comfort on command, but a model. The possibility that even genuine fear, genuine thirst, genuine danger can be held within words and images patient enough to also hold trust. The night watches that the 63rd Psalm describes, the hours of wakeful remembrance rather than anxious rehearsal, belong to this same practice. Even in the hours when sleep does not come easily, even in the wakeful dark, there is the possibility of turning the mind toward remembrance rather than only toward worry, not by force, not by denial of whatever is genuinely difficult, but by the same patient attention that produced these ancient songs in the first place. Let us hold all four of these psalms together now, gently, as we move toward the close of this evening's reflection. The shepherd's psalm offers the image of being led to green pastures, to quiet waters, through the valley of deep shadow, to a table prepared even in the presence of difficulty, toward a dwelling that does not end. The 27th Psalm offers the image of light and stronghold, confidence in the face of genuine threat, the settled desire simply to dwell in nearness to what is good, and the patient instruction to wait, to be strong, to let the heart take courage. The 63rd Psalm offers the image of thirst answered, the honest acknowledgement of a dry and weary land, and the discovery, even within that dryness, of remembrance in the night watches and the shelter of sheltering wings. The 91st Psalm offers the image of shelter itself, the secret place of the Most High, the comprehensive protection that spans every hour of day and night, and the voice that promises not the absence of trouble, but presence within it. 4 songs, 4 landscapes of difficulty: the valley, the army, the wilderness, the snare, and in each of them, a settled trust that does not require the difficulty to disappear first, but that finds, even in the midst of difficulty, the grounds for rest. This is perhaps the deepest comfort these ancient songs can offer to the particular hour we are in together tonight. Whatever difficulty the day now ending has carried, whatever valley, whatever army, whatever dryness, whatever snare may have been part of its texture, these songs do not ask that difficulty to be resolved before rest becomes possible. They offer, instead, the testimony of someone who walked through real difficulty and found, within it, words that could hold both honesty and trust together. Green pastures and the valley of shadow in the same song. Confident waiting and ongoing adversaries in the same song. Thirst and the richest of foods in the same song. The thousand who fall and the secret place of shelter in the same song. The difficulty and the trust were never separate in these songs. They were always held together, the one acknowledged honestly and the other extended faithfully, without either one cancelling the other. Let us return, before we close, to the image with which we began. The green pasture and the quiet water, the shepherd leading the flock toward rest. It is evening now, in the imagination of this story, in the hill country around Bethlehem. The sheep have been led, across the long warmth of the day, from one patch of grazing to another, and now, as the light begins to soften and lengthen into the colours of approaching dusk, the shepherd brings them to the place where they will rest for the night. The green pasture, if one has been found, or simply the most sheltered and safest available ground if the green pasture remains, as it so often does in that dry landscape. More aspiration than a daily reality. The flock settles. The shepherd remains near, watchful but not anxious, present through the hours of dusk and into the deepening dark, ready with rod and staff should any danger present itself. But for now, simply present, simply near, simply keeping watch over the rest of those in his care. This is the image David carried, we believe, into his understanding of his own relationship with the one he trusted. Not a distant occasional oversight, but a near and constant watching, available through every hour, attentive to every need, leading toward rest even when rest required patient searching to find. We have walked tonight through 4 ancient songs that emerged from this same trust. Songs written by someone who knew real valleys, real adversaries, real thirst, real danger, and who found, again and again, words sturdy enough to hold both the honesty of difficulty and the settled ground of trust. These songs do not belong only to the distant past. They have been sung and prayed and whispered by countless people in countless circumstances across 3,000 years. by the sick and the frightened, by travelers and exiles, by those facing death and those simply facing the ordinary difficulty of an ordinary hard day. They have been carried into hospital rooms and into wartime trenches, into quiet bedrooms at the end of difficult days, and into gatherings of worship surrounded by community and song. Tonight, they are being carried into this quiet hour, into whatever difficulty or ease your own day has held, into the particular landscape of your own valley or wilderness or shelter. Let the songs settle now, the way evening settles over the hill country of Judah. Gently, gradually, the light softening, the shadows lengthening, the day's warmth giving way to the cooler stillness of approaching night. The green pasture is in the imagination tonight, wherever it might be found in the landscape of your own life. The quiet water, calm enough to be approached without fear. The shepherd, near and watchful, leading toward rest even through whatever valley of shadow the day required crossing. The stronghold is in the imagination tonight. The rock, the fortress, the settled confidence that does not depend on the absence of every adversary, but rests instead in the character of the one being trusted. The patient instruction to wait, to be strong, to let the heart take courage, even while the resolution it longs for has not yet fully arrived. The wilderness is in the imagination tonight, and within it, the dry and weary land that so much of ordinary life sometimes resembles. And also, within that same wilderness, the possibility of remembrance in the night watches, the shelter of sheltering wings, the soul satisfied as with the richest of foods even in a season of genuine scarcity. And the secret place is in the imagination tonight, the shelter of the Most High, comprehensive enough to span every hour of day and night, every kind of danger that might arise, holding not the promise of trouble's absence, but the promise of presence within it. Let the breath slow now. Let the body rest where it lies. Let the weight of today, whatever valley it required, whatever adversary it presented, whatever thirst it left unanswered, whatever snare it required navigating, let all of that settle gently downward, the way the light settles into the western hills at the end of a long day in the country David once called home. You do not need to have resolved every difficulty tonight in order to rest. These ancient songs were not written by someone whose valleys had all been crossed, whose adversaries had all been defeated, whose thirst had been fully and finally quenched. They were written from within the valley, within the presence of adversaries, within the dry and weary land. And they found there not the absence of difficulty, but the settled ground of a trust that did not require difficulty's absence in order to be real. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Wait for the Lord. Be strong, and let your heart take courage. When I remember you upon my bed, I meditate on you in the night watches. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge. Let these words rest in the quiet of this hour, not as instructions to be followed, but as companions for whatever your own night holds. The shepherd who led David to green pastures and quiet waters is the same presence these songs have carried across 3,000 years into every kind of night that human beings have ever faced. The valley of deep shadow does not have the final word. The encamped army does not have the final word. The dry and weary land does not have the final word. The snare of the fowler does not have the final word. Goodness and mercy following. A heart made strong in waiting. Remembrance in the night watches. shelter beneath sheltering wings. Be still now. The shepherd is near. The watching continues. The rest that has been prepared is yours to receive. Rest, sleep. Amen.